Welcome to the Rejected Religion podcast. I'm Stephanie Shea. I'm bringing you another episode about magic, this time taking a look at grimoires or invocational texts. My guest this month is Andrea Franchetto. Andrea holds a Master of Science in Architecture from the Politecnico di Milano and a Research Master of Arts in Religious Studies from the University of Amsterdam. Andrea is currently a PhD candidate at Stockholm University and is developing a spatial approach to prescriptive ritual texts, ritual sources, and manuscripts. In particular, Andrea focuses on conceptualizations and constructions of ritual space in the European grimoire tradition of ritual magic from the 13th to the 15th century. In addition, Andrea is teaching a course called Magic in the European History of Religions, Texts and Traditions, and this is the inspiration for the upcoming discussion. As I explained in the interview, to this point, my podcasts about magic have pretty much focused on modern or contemporary magic. So this was a wonderful opportunity to talk with Andrea about the larger category of magic, as well as how this applies to earlier forms of magic found in grimoires. In the first part of our interview, Andrea and I discussed the complex issue regarding the definition of quote-unquote magic within the Western historical academic study of esotericism and or religion, and how we could perhaps see this meta-category as family resemblances or patterns of magicity that allows for comparisons of different magical practices and attitudes. It may be helpful to the listeners to check out the literature provided in the program notes to get a fuller picture of this ongoing discussion. We also talk about the differences between the etic and emic perspectives, or the outsider versus insider views of quote-unquote magic, as grimoires are concerned with the magician's views and ideas about the rituals they perform and the significance these rituals hold. We also delve into the topic of legitimization of ritual magical practices, as the manuscripts that we are looking at fall within the context of Christianity from the 1200s to the 1500s. In this time period, most magical texts were considered to be heretical by the church, and this meant that magicians were forced to try to legitimize the use of these manuscripts. We look in particular at the views of Heinrich Cornelius Agrippa von Nettesheim, the author of the famous 3 books of occult philosophy, and his attempts to restore the reputation of magic as a divine art. During the course of our discussion, several important texts are mentioned, and I'd like to make note of them ahead of time so that you will recognize the names. These being the Key of Solomon, the Ars Notoria, the Picatrix from 1256 that we will be discussing in more detail, the Speculum Astronomiae, or Mirror of Astronomy, the Abramelin, and the Liber Iratus Honori, or the Sworn Book of Honorius. The Sworn Book will be discussed in more detail as it relates to Andrea's own research into ritual spaces, how they are supposed to be constructed, the types of entities being summoned, plus much more. We use Andrea's article titled Imaginal Architectural Devices and the Ritual Space of Medieval Necromancy as the basis for this part of the interview, and he explains these concepts in more detail, especially why space is such an important part of the magical ritual. Now, my apologies for the lengthy introduction, but as this discussion is quite specific in nature, I thought it would be a good idea to give the listener a heads up to some particular things to make for easier listening. I hope you enjoy it. Welcome to the podcast, Andrea.
Thank you very much for inviting me, Stephanie. It's a pleasure.
It's so good to see you again, Andrea. I'm so very happy that you're joining me today to talk about magic and ritual magic spaces.
Mm-hmm. Exactly.
We have got a lot of things to talk about. I have a whole list of things that I'd try to get through today, but we'll see what happens. Let's just jump in. You recently taught a course at Stockholm University, where you are located now, about magic, specifically magic in the history of religions. And when I was looking at the reading list for the course that you provided for me, I noticed that it contained quite a bit of literature discussing practices taken from antiquity and medieval periods, of course, mixed in with contemporary and all of, trying to get a well-rounded view, of course. I've made a few attempts myself on my podcast to talk about magic, but it's usually been from a more contemporary perspective. And actually, my last podcast was talking about emic experiences in chaos magic. So this is very, very contemporary stuff. I haven't really focused a lot on earlier perspectives, aside from the one interview I did with Dr. Corsi Dosu about the Coptic magical papyri with Corsi, and that was really interesting to me. So I'm very happy to have the opportunity to talk a bit more about these earlier expressions of magic with you today.
Yeah, thank you, Stephanie. And yes, the course was designed by me and Professor Aguilasprem, and indeed had the scope to offer this kind of long-term perspective on the history of grimoires tradition, specifically European grimoire traditions. And indeed, while designing the course, we realized that indeed there were not so many other places where a course specifically oriented towards history of religion students were offered in the European University, and so we thought also that to offer it in this chronological order, so to focus on beginning with antiquity, and also the first lecture was about the problem of magic as a category and the etymology of magic that originate in Greek antiquity, and let's say half of the course focused on late antique, the Greek magical papyri, but also late antique theurgy, medieval ritual magic, and then Renaissance ceremonial magic. So yes, that basically was the let's say the first part of this course, and then in the second part we would have focused on late modern traditions that you are more familiar with, as you said, and it was very interesting to see also how many connection we could have drawn throughout all the different seminars, but also all the patterns of continuity that we have found across the transmissions of ritual techniques and practices, because specifically the course was focused mostly on, and is, because it's still going on, the course is focused on practices and ritual techniques. So the patterns, continuities, but also the transformations and innovations in magical practices that we see across all these centuries, because we need to remember that magic or the type of magic in brackets that we find in the grimoire tradition is a constant transforming and innovative tradition that constantly reinvent itself. So it's not dogmatic in the sense that that it remains stable throughout the centuries. But according to the practitioners and to the way also manuscript has been copied and transmitted, new elements appear, new hybridizations appears, and that's also what makes fascinating, I think, the topic in general.
Very important that you point that out. That it's always developing. The ideas are taken and by the older ideas, I should say, are taken by the newer generations and kind of adapted to their own tastes or their own ideas and goals for themselves. So so this is great. I'm glad that you explained that. a little bit, because we're not going to be able to discuss everything that you talk about in this course. It's far too broad. So I've narrowed our scope of discussion down a little bit to a few of the texts that I've found in the literature list. And I hope this will lay a good foundation for our later discussion about your own research about ritual magical spaces. And for the listeners, the links to the reference material will be listed in the program notes. And luckily, I was able to find everything online, and it's free. You don't have to buy anything. It's one of these rare occasions where you can find everything online. Okay, I'd like to start, and you've already touched on this. I'd like to start with this discussion about the word magic. And when we say magic, it's always in quotation marks, because there's so much difficulty surrounding this term. And it's a little bit, I guess you could compare it to the word religion. What is religion? What is anything? So the word magic in quotation marks. This is a very broad semantic field. I really enjoyed the article by Otto and Strasberg talking. It's called General Introduction: Magic, a Critical Category in the Study of Religions. And on page 2 and 3 of the article, they talk about this very wide range of phenomena. There are 39 points that they list in here, but this is just partial. I mean, this is not complete whatsoever. A few of the points, the bullet points that they list here, I'll just read a few. Alchemy, astrology, conjuration of spirits, divination, exorcism, healing, miracles and marvels, necromancy, which is the practice of communicating with the dead, especially to predict future outcomes. Sacrifices, sorcery, spells, witchcraft. I mean, I could go on and on. There are 39 things here on this list. When I was reading all of these things, I'm like, yeah, we all have this idea of magic. I think even people who aren't scholars in religion or in esotericism, everybody has an idea of what magic is. And it's usually, all of these different things that people could mention if somebody asks you, what do you think magic is? It's very, very broad in that sense. But when I was looking at this bullet point list, I noticed words like alchemy and astrology. These could be considered things in their own right, but they're kind of lumped into the category of magic as well. I thought that was interesting. Plus other phenomena like exorcism, healing, sacrifice, miracles. These are also found in other religious beliefs and systems like Christianity, for example. So this is already very fuzzy term. Do you have anything that you'd like to add to that argument?
Yeah, precisely. And I think that introduction to the anthology of classics of magic that Otto and Strasberg has written is very, very fruitful, I think, for operationalizing magic and the study of magic, and also possible path of research. Because indeed, like, we have come to the conclusion that or the scholar community has come to the conclusion that we cannot use magic, how was defined by the classics, to make analysis or interpretations of, for example, other cultural context, because it's deeply ethnocentric, the term, but also, as you said, it's really hard to define what are the features of magic, because it's more a category that goes into the direction of family resemblance. So you cannot ultimately say what is the essence of magic. There are no ontological features that we can talk about magic. But what we can do, and that's what Otto and Strasberg propose, is that we can indeed identify in certain patterns patterns of magicity. So it's like moving from a kind of overarching category of magic as something that we actually identify in the world, that we can distinguish clearly from other practices, like, for example, religion, and instead working at what are the building blocks of what we actually perceive as magic, and or like that we can conceptualize as magic, or for example, instances of what we would call magic then can also be found in religion. And so patterns of magicity is a more like kind of tool, more useful tool for doing comparison also, comparison of more different contexts and different, but also like theoretical also on different, theoretical approaches on magic and religion. And I think that's what makes it useful to start thinking not in terms of magic as something that we need to kind of distinguish from religion, or that we need to distinguish from sciences, as the old paradigm that basically that was the triad with which classic scholars like Taylor and Fraser worked. So in seeing like that magic was distinct from science and distinct from religion, and there was a sort of evolution of societies towards basically from magic, so a sort of primitive understanding of how the natural world works, through modernity that would have basically overcome the old magical primitive models of how nature function to our scientific model. So these, of course, are not anymore retainable as correct paradigms of understanding societies and cultures. So in this sense, going towards a more fruitful way of using these multifarious features and instances of what we call magic is moving towards patterns of magicity. And it's very interesting that in this article they use magicity in a drawing from physics, and they say that magicity is now, if I recall correctly, is a property of protons, I guess. That's there is a specific number of protons that makes that particular physical element particularly stable, and so they link like this aspect of stability with the notions of magicity, and that's indeed what we aim to do. So to search for a more stable categories of term that help us to do comparisons, or to do like this kind of analysis, so to use it as a lenses to see, to investigate and to interpret ritual actions, but also representations.
That is very interesting about the physics aspect, about the stable aspect of trying to bring in this factor of stability for the topic, I guess, of what you're studying. So we could think about in this sense of also what Egil Asprem was also talking about in his review of the article, that there needed to be a singular object of study and not just this fuzzy meta category, which we're really trying to stabilize and focus our attention on one thing, such as he gave in his article, ritualized action as an ontological feature of magic. So we're talking about magic then in the sense of kind of like the meta category, or the umbrella term that encompasses all of these other phenomena or features. However, the word magic has been used in ancient texts, and I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about what are those texts referring to when they actually use the word magic or magia or other forms of the word.
Yeah, and here is not the problems will vanish away, because also that's another completely another from another perspective, from the emic perspective. So before we were talking about the etic second order category, but then of course we should not forget that indeed the magic, magia, and all its derivatives also in other languages when it was translated were still used by practitioners who also self-identified themselves as magicians and their practice as magic, or ars magica, for example, in Latin, but also were used by the polemics. So the theologians who contested certain practices and certain ceremonies that were considered unorthodox. And this goes for the European context, the Western context, of course, I'm talking about. So indeed, in this sense, practitioners and theologians also use the terms in different ways. So they define magic in different ways. But also, that's what is interesting, especially in the Middle Ages, is that we find other terminologies. For example, you mentioned before necromancy, and you said divination through the dead. But actually, in the Middle Ages, this term, that was of course a Greek term, necromanteia, so the divination through the dead, when it was translated into Latin and became nigromantia, nigromancia also, start to have new meanings, and in particular, necromancy then start to be attributed to the conjurations of demons. So terminologies that were, also the same terms or like similar terms like necromancy, nigromancia, necromancia, have different meanings and are used differently according to different sources and different practitioners. So the problem is always I think, in how to deal with all these varieties and of meanings and terminologies that can be ascribed to magic or that shares certain patterns of continuities in terms of meanings, but also what they mean in actual ritual practices. Is that we need to always contextualize our terms, so depending on the sources we are dealing with. If you want, I can go a bit in the history of the term magic.
Yes, please do.
No, okay, yeah. So basically, magic was referred to as the art of the magoi, and magos was a loan word from the Persian magus. And as I said, it has ambiguous definitions, but one of the first sources where we find used magoi is in ethnographical accounts, such as the one of Herodotus, the famous Greek historian, in particular when he narrates about the Greek and Persian wars. Is here that he writes about magoi as this priest or a priestly caste that did specific particular techniques, and in particular in the Persian wars, it says that this Magian or this magoi chants, so use words of power and make sacrifices. So they were a sort of ritual experts and Persian ritual experts, and that had an important religious function for Herodotus in this sense. So it was a category to other. Othering category. But at the same time, then magos, if we go to another context, that of tragedies, it was used in a derogatory meaning. And for example, in Sophocles, King Oedipus, Tiresias was considered the magos, and with the meaning of being a charlatan, a hatcher of plots, a crafty beggar. So we start seeing here, like, again, polysemy. So like at the same time, they were ritual, a ritual priestly caste, Persian ritual priestly caste, and at the same time, charlatan has this kind of derogatory meaning. But then it's interesting also to look, for example, at the different at other different terms that had that share meaning with magike, mageia, and magoi, that were precisely pharmakeia and goetheia. So goetheia, for example, was usually translated with sorcery, and it comes from the word goes, that means the lament, and goes was the wailer, so the one that was appointed for the communication with the dead, so that helped a deceased to move from the here to there, and therefore it was a specific figure during the moment of the death, but at the same time, pharmakeia, for example, that was also another term used that we find attested, referred to the use of substances and pharmaca, in particular, certain herbs. And it is interesting to see that in the Suda encyclopedia, that is a bit later than the time when Herodotus wrote, but anyway, this anonymous Byzantine encyclopedia says that mageia is an invocation for beneficent spirits, for the production of something that was good and benevolent. And by contrast, instead, the sorcery, so goetheia, refers to an invocation of maleficent spirits, which should take place around the graves. So we can start to see that there are indeed certain elements and features that suggest that we are talking of a family resemblance category,
right.
Also across all these terminologies. But as I hope I have portrayed, is that it's very complex to try to reduce and synthesize under under magic all these features. Like, it's almost impossible. So we talk about magic, but we should also be aware of all the other various terms that were used by our sources, not only in antiquity but also in the Middle Ages and modern times. For example, in modern time, even magic is changed with a K, to distinguish from previous magic. So is also magic. Then the term belongs also to the practitioners themselves that constantly, reinvent also the terminology, and so it's also important to look at this aspect, of course.
So you've explained that very beautifully, although we have this word magic, it's associated with other practices as well. Even in antiquity, it's been associated with other things that also have their own terms. So that makes it a complicated kind of area in which you're going to stick your toe into, of course. Otto also wrote a different article about magic from the Wiley-Blackwell Encyclopedia of Sociology that adds some other interesting points about how we could think about magic. He calls it a wandering word, which I think would be, apropos for what you're discussing here about all of these different types of meanings that this word has and different applications of the word, associations of the word. He calls it a floating signifier, that it can mean whatever the magician wants it to mean. You mentioned that with the contemporary expression of magic with a K at the end. So we have this the power of the practitioner also influencing what the word means to themselves. He also notes that there are 4 semantic notions regarding it, and those 4 are ritual, power, miracle, and wish fulfillment. So that also kind of helps us to understand, I guess, more narrowing of the category of the category of magic, of what it is that we're actually talking about here. And he also has 2 main social functions: othering and self-identification. And you've already noted that the word was used as a form of othering when you were talking about the Persians. And the self-identification, I think we'll probably get into later on in the discussion. And lastly, and here I want to actually pay a little bit more attention to these other 3 aspects that he talks about, quote, Western learned magic, that it's valuable, effective, and morally or divinely legitimate. And in the list of other phenomena or features of magic, it's always kind of, or it's considered illegitimate. And there is this pejorative sense of what a magician would be doing. You mentioned before about the charlatan aspect of the magician. So on that last point about legitimacy, I'd like to talk about the possible reasons why people wanted to practice magic. And use Heinrich's chapter about Agrippa to frame this discussion. And this heretical viewpoint of magic during Agrippa's lifetime, but also even before and after, is present. But Agrippa had a mission to, quote, restore the ancient reputation of magic as a divine art. And that I'm referring to Wouter Heinrich's chapter out of the book The Occult World. And that quote is taken from page 93. I'm going to open up my book here. Could you talk a bit more about this tension about magic and why people like Agrippa were making this effort to change the attitudes about it, if you can? Yeah, exactly. This is so precisely, I think what Otto is talking about here is about self-legitimization of magic and this aspect especially of a divine granted authority in practicing magic, for example, that we find so often attested in the grimoire tradition especially, or in Western learned magic, so in this kind of ritual textual traditions. Is indeed the perspective of the practitioner, especially these aspects we find it often in the prologues of grimoires, where practitioner clearly state in advance that what the content of the handbook or the rituals that they are about to tell us about are ordained by divine authority, and usually there is this narratives of a lineage that goes from usually angelic revelations, as we've seen, for example, in the Liberi that give knowledge, magical knowledge, to someone like, for example, Solomon and Hermes, these mythical figures that then pass on knowledge and writes down knowledge, for example, in handbooks like the Liberi Juratus or the Key of Solomon to their son, and then in this case, then the practitioner, once they had in their hand the book or the handbooks, right, they are part of this lineage of transmission that goes back directly to divine intervention, angelic intervention. So in this sense, we can conceive as grimoire, the magic in the grimoire, or Western learned magic as something that practitioner contends to have been divine and legitimate. So in this sense, when it comes to Agrippa, of course, we are in a peculiar context, that of Renaissance, the Renaissance period. So it's also
a period that where magic or the theories about magic are start to being developed, thanks also to Marsilio Ficino, Giovanni Pico della Mirandola, and so on. And one of the central, let's say, concerns about Renaissance practitioners or like occult philosophers, so these humanists that has a particular interest in these topics, were about the possibility of magic to be a way to restore a human pristine conditions, that of the Adamic condition. So the one that like a condition that gives humankind this kind of dignity and perfection of knowledge about the cosmos, about nature. And of course, it was not only Agrippa that had this in mind, but also other figures like John Dee, for example, and in particularly, these humanists thought that after the fall, humanity and nature and learning about nature has degenerated, and therefore the book of nature was a corrupted text. And the knowledge then about nature and the cosmos became imperfect, with errors and inaccuracy. So they conceived magic as a medium to restore this Adamic language that was then a perfect medium to obtain directly from God this kind of knowledge. So at the basis, therefore, of this of the systematization of magic by Agrippa and the other humanist scholar was desire to have this perfect knowledge, and of course knowledge is indeed continuity. I would say a pattern of continuity across. I would say all the entire traditions of Western learned magic. We find it often also in medieval ritual magic, for example, the desire to acquire the knowledge of the cosmos quite fast, quite quickly, and through magic intervention, to angelic intervention. For example, the Ars Notoria is one of these famous that circulated a lot in the Middle Ages, that give the possibility to practitioner to obtain knowledge of the liberal arts in a short amount of time. I don't remember exactly, but I think it's 2 months time, I guess, or now I'm not sure, but anyway, in a very quite shortly compared to doing the entire courses of at the university. And therefore, and this aspect that knowledge is obtained through contact and establishing contact with intermediary beings, so that the intermediary beings are those who can bestow knowledge onto humankind, and that magic is a technique in order to obtain knowledge, perfect knowledge, is definitely, yes, something that we find as a continuity, I would say, and also as a desire that orients ritual practices and ritual technique in the traditions of in the grimoire tradition. Yeah.
So what you're talking about with Agrippa is that there's a specific type of idea of what magic is doing in this regard. Heinrich has written a book about Lazzarelli. Seems to be a very favorite person in the past. That in this chapter about Agrippa, Heinrich is suggesting that Agrippa was reading Lazzarelli and getting the ideas about this perfect state of mankind that was in existence before the fall of man. That this was an idea that Agrippa found in Lazzarelli. And what I was wondering from your perspective, this whole idea about, there was this perfect state and that magic can help us to return to this perfect state before the fall of man had occurred. Are you finding that Agrippa and maybe a few other of his contemporaries, as you said, the humanist idea, is this something that is unique to that time period, or are you also seeing this type of narrative in earlier periods, such as ancient and medieval, or is this just located in this Renaissance time?
Well, I would not do a straight comparison, so to say that there was actually the same argument that, after the fall, humankind has lost the knowledge of this language, this non-discursive even language that grant the possibility to have this perfect knowledge. But clearly, that. For example, if I compare with the Picatrix, this aspect, that also in the Picatrix we have this idea that magic gives you the possibility to unveil the mystery of nature, because you then knows about how all these occult forces works in the universe. And in one of the first chapter of the Picatrix, we have this sense that actually humankind through magic, which there is not called magic, but it's called nigromancia. And here is what we were saying before. Right. Through nigromancia, humankind can climb back to the place where they come from, so where God dwells, and from therein they can have perfect knowledge. So this was also, of course, one of the goals of theurgy, to have ascension. So, but I will not make a straightforward comparison with Agrippa and these, for example, theorization of magic as a way of because that was specifically also for was specifically about language. So magic has to do with words, and indeed, all the Enochian magic that comes after with D was about, getting this kind of alphabet, Enochian alphabet from angels. And while instead it's true that magic has always to do with powerful words and words of power, but I think in different ways. And I think it is important to highlight these differences also about cosmologies, but also what techniques, especially also, because I would say that. The techniques that, for example, employed John Dee or Agrippa, or that Agrippa described in his De Occulta Philosophia Libris Tres, although if they drew on medieval material, for example, we know that Dee used the Summa Sacrae Magice, that is a medieval compendium from the 14th century written by Berengarius Ganello, that has all these techniques that come, for example, from the Libri Ratus Honori, although they reinvented it and they reinterpreted it in their own way. So I can see the continuity of reestablishing perfect knowledge and try to get this perfect knowledge about how the universe works, and this is definitely something that we can see. But I think that is with different concerns, different desires, and different techniques also that is done.
Right. Yeah. Okay. Fair enough. That is. I'm very, very happy with that, with that answer. Thank you for humoring me. Actually, though, for the listeners, I don't know if everyone out there is aware of what the Picatrix is and why that book in particular is kind of a unusual source to find this information about regaining the divine state and perfect knowledge. Could you explain what the Picatrix is?
Yeah, so the Picatrix probably is one of the most influential compendium, theoretical and practical compendium of astral magic. Its original is in Arabic, and it was translated then into Latin at the court of Alfonso X in the 13th century. And it's very interesting precisely because it has this both aspects. So it's both theoretical, so it offers a theoretical framework to magic that has specifically to do with the astral theories of how planetary bodies and the stars emit rays and or astral influences, and that humankind can manipulate through the use of substances and techniques and ceremonies these influences and these astral rays to produce effects in nature and in the sublunary world. So yes, so that's basically in general term what is the Picatrix about. And as I said, it was translated into Latin, but became particularly influential in the 15th century. So it started to circulate quite a bit during the 15th century, and also that's why it also became a kind of reference text among Renaissance humanists, because the Picatrix wanted to show also how that exactly the natural magic, so the use of talismans and amulets, actually has belongs to all, like the mechanisms of natural magic belongs to natural causality, and natural causality is directly connected to God's will. And so in this aspect, in this theory of magic that lays behind the Picatrix, Renaissance humanists start to see a sort of legitimization of magic and of natural magic in particular. That's why it became so popular. But of course, the Picatrix is much more than natural magic, because or astral magic, because indeed it contains also rituals of apparitions, so techniques that attempt at conjure up planetary deities and planetary spirits in front of the practitioner, so that this deity should appear in front of the practitioner, and the practitioner then can communicate with them. And this clearly falls, according to theological understandings and theories about ceremonies, into that category of addressative magic, what Nicholas Weil-Parrot called addressative magic. So ceremonies that directly address intermediary being, and therefore that falls out from natural magic per se, that is the simple and mechanic manipulations of natural elements. So also the Picatrix is very complex, and I think also it lays at the crossroad of astral magic and ritual magic, even though of course the framework is that of talismanic and image magic. But of course it attests different sources and different influences. As I said, a compendium. So the author of the Picatrix drew from many other sources that then combine together and present in this very huge treatise of magic. Is one of the hugest, I would say, together with the Summa Sacrae Magicae that I was referring before.
So the practices that are being explained in this book, the rituals, etc., would these have been practices that you could, as a magician, that you could be open about, or are these considered very heavily heretical, heresy by the church?
Well, yeah, exactly. That's one of the problems of also about legitimization of magic. So that the practitioner clearly state that magic is indeed something that is given by God, so to humankind, and in most of the occasions. And so, in this sense, they try to make the argument that what they are doing is in line with God's will. But of course, for the church, most of the time is not the case, and usually ecclesiastical authority condemned every practice that has some kind of addressativity, as I was saying before. So, for example, in particular in one important treatise, the Speculum Astronomiae, that was attributed to Albert the Great, it was there stated that what could be considered like a illicit ceremony, abominable ceremonies, and those were specifically those that use exorcism and suffumigations and conjurations. So where there is indeed like a sort of semiotics, that a system of signs that, for example, the inscriptions of or the engraving of a certain amulet with exotic characters that you don't know the meaning of. Ecclesiastical authorities, also like Thomas of Aquinas says that, well, if there is a sign, there's clearly it means that there is communication with something, and this something can only be a demon. So they basically try to condemn every type of practices that, even though they claim, for example, that it's a form of angelic communication, like in the case, for example, of the Liberiuratus Honori, where the operators explicitly address angels. Ecclesiastical authority would say that it's impossible to address angels because they do not, obey to humankind that lays at a lower rank, and therefore what actually they are doing is that they are subjugated by demons, and therefore it falls in a illicit form of practice. So the debate also, I think, is a bit about what are the entity that one claims to conjure, and what it's the take from the polemics on what actually are the entities that one can conjure up. And then the forms of magic that indeed would not cause any harms would be those who do not imply any type of signs, but only, for example, the use of herbs or stones. And this would fall then into the category of natural magic. But also there, the boundaries are always fuzzy according to the sensibilities of the polemics on what could be considered a illegitimate or legitimate technique.
I find this to be very interesting in reading these texts about the types of entities that one is trying to contact. That especially, and you mentioned this book, the Liberiuratus Honori, or in simple English, the Sworn Book of Honorius. There is a portion in that book that says that there are certain types of angels that can't be summoned because they're only in service to God. So, those are like the highest angels. You can't summon them. You can't conjure them. So, even if you are making some type of request or intercession to God through these angels, they wouldn't listen to you anyway. So who is it that you're talking to? You have to be talking to a demon. So it's like this whole roundabout going back and forth with, who are you actually talking to? This whole trying to make the argument of no, I'm actually talking to an angel. I know I'm talking to an angel, but can you be sure? Because that whole rhetoric of demons are always imposturing, and the angel, so it makes it very very tricky to try to make it a legitimate form. Even if if you're being accused of conversing with demons and you want to make the argument of angels, it's like you're going to be shot down immediately, because how can you make any proof, quote unquote, proof of who it is that you're actually conversing with?
Exactly. So. And that's also fascinating to see for example, in the Swarm Book of Honorius, if we look at the words used by the authors or the redactors, because also this is an important aspect I think I should mention about this tradition, is that these traditions, or like the transmission of the text, also encompass different hands at work on the text. So it was not only the author, but also the redactor, the copyist, that add things and change things. And for example, in the London tradition, so in the bulk of manuscripts that are kept at the British Library of the Liber Iuratus, we find, for example, that in certain passage of the text, the author used the word angelus, so angels, and in other parts used the word spirits. So there is even an ambiguity among the redactors and the copyists on how to call the entities and what sort of entities they are. And has also already been shown that indeed the Liber Iuratus attest Jewish and Islamic influences when it comes to intermediary beings, the intermediary beings address, especially the angeliology of the Liber Iuratus might have Jewish sources and influences from Hekalut literature in particular, but also the way of addressing the angels might refer instead on Arabic demonic conjurations and invocations. So again, here we are dealing with a very complex system of transmission, path of transmissions, and cultural, encounters that shape the practice of magic, the techniques, but also the way people might have understood these entities. And we need to understand also that magic is always goal-oriented. So at one point, the most important thing is that the practice should be effective, and it's not so much a point about if I'm doing something dogmatic. I want something that is powerful and effective, and I draw from the source that it seems to me the best and most authoritative also on the term, on the topic, and that's also why we see so much variations across handbooks and manuscripts.
Right. I'd like to get into the Sworn Book of Honorius a little bit more and get back to this discussion about the types of spirits and how there might be little clues from what source this information might be coming from, whether it be Jewish or Islamic or otherwise. The chapter by Caitlin Messler talks a lot about this book. That's coming out of the book Invoking Angels by Claire, or edited by Claire Fenger. She has a table in this chapter that goes into this. So I'd like to get into that a little bit more as we go on. I'd like to just start by noting, though, that as the story goes in this book of the Sworn Book, she writes, Caitlin writes, the Pope and other high-ranking church officials have been manipulated by demons into believing that the magical arts are evil. In the face of impending persecution and out of fear that their art would be lost, a council of magicians gathered to preserve the secrets of magic. They chose Honorius, the main title character here, to commit this magical knowledge to writing, and he did so with the help of an angel named Hakrohel. I'm not certain if I'm pronouncing that name correctly.
Yes.
The magicians then swore an oath to protect the secrets contained in the book, and therefore it is known as the Sworn Book. So I think this is also kind of like almost a thriller in a sense, that you're reading this book and there's this juicy bit of information in there, that the
Exactly.
manipulation by demons and all of this. I think that's great.
Yeah, it's one of, exactly. That's also what I was saying before about legitimizing in first hand, because that is the prologue of the handbook. So the first pages that one would read, right? And also, this prologue has been particularly used by scholars to try to find a date for the Liber Iuratus. So when could have possibly be written, because this prologue indeed tells us about possibly that the date of composition might have been the pontificate of John the 22nd, that had his pontificate between 1316 and 34, and this because the Liber Iuratus is made of a first opus, a first work, a first operation, that is the obtainment of the visions of God, and during the pontificate of John the 22nd, the vision of God was ordained that the vision of God cannot be obtained until after the final judgment or death, and therefore this particular aspect of the ritual would have been heretical in this sense, and therefore the authors try to defend themselves and saying that the Pope and the ministry of the Church were biased by demons in thinking that that magic is an evil practice, so that is about the prologue, and about this particular aspect of trying to defend themselves and being apologetic about the techniques that are written in the handbook. But indeed, the handbook is not only about the visions of God, but it's also about conjuration of spirits. And indeed, it's interesting that we find first the visions of God, and then the sequence of conjurations of three types of rank of spirits: the planetary, the airy, and terrestrial spirits. And it's interesting also to see that it's a kind of there's a kind of rationale according to this, the way in which the handbook is structured, because the first ritual, so the obtainment of the visions of God, also grant permission then to work out the conjuration, so to conjure up the demons. So demons are always conjured up thanks to the authority that is of God, that is granted onto the practitioners. And also we see here the argument of why magic is indeed illicit practice according to the author, because it's always God that gives the power to the operator to summon the demon. It's never that the operator has power by themselves on this hierarchy. Right. And it's also a way to use liturgy, Christian liturgy especially, so to manipulate liturgy and to adapt the traditional liturgy or the Orthodox liturgy in a new way for these personal goals. So, because we have the uttering of the psalms, these purification rituals that reminds a lot about Christian liturgy.
All right, I'd like to talk a little bit about these types of spirits: the celestial, planetary, airy, and terrestrial angels that the Sworn Book talks about. I thought this was really interesting. when I was studying with you, and even before that in my bachelor about, religion, I always thought, I don't know why I did, but I always thought that there was like this barrier between my ability to comprehend old texts, grimoires or other compendiums and things. I always had this like self-imposed limitation put upon myself, like I can't read this stuff because it's not going to make any sense to me. I don't understand it enough. And I'm really kicking myself for doing that, because I think this stuff is so interesting. These old, really old books are really interesting. Like I said before, it was like this book opens with a thriller would, like the Da Vinci Code or something, that the demons are, are deceiving the Pope and the cardinals and everyone within the church. I just think that this is actually, I'm really finding a new appreciation for these old books, and I have to thank you for that, because you provided all of this information for me, the literature.
I'm glad to hear that. Like you find it interesting.
That as an aside, but I thought the whole explanation about the types of angels. That there's really this ambiguous aspect of angels, that they're really, some of them are neither good or bad, some of them are very bad, some of them are very good and benevolent, depending on where you're calling them from. So could you talk more about these types of angels and spirits? Yeah,
exactly. And here also we go into what in Mesler, basically, chapter that precisely about the nature of this angel, because we know that was written by Christian authors and redactors, probably the Liberatus Honori. So it doesn't make a lot of sense, this idea of constraining angels from a Christian perspective, because that's really what the practitioners are doing in this handbook. So they are constraining and forcing them to appear in front of them, and they are basically dragging them down from the planetary spheres onto the place of the circles, and they force them to execute what they request. So it's really controversial, like this way of dealing with the spirits. And that's why Mesler points out about the innovations of the Liberatus in dealings with intermediary beings, because precisely we start having aspect and characters of the angels that has to do more with Jewish frameworks in particular, especially in terms of the fact that angels have now an identity, they have names, and they have also features, bodily features, how they manifest also. Every kind of angel has a specific type of appearance, but also the way in which the handbooks describe, the place where they describe the angel is important, because the handbooks gives information about the angelic characteristics, feature, their place in the cosmos, their order and their ranks, before one is supposed to read about the procedure on invoking them. And this is typical of instead Arabic sources, where it is very important once to know about all the features and the characteristics and the names of these entities before invoking them, because it's knowledge about who they are and how they are made, and also what one should expect, that gives power over them. So also these aspects are important to mention, that we need to be aware of, the multicultural aspect of this cosmology as well. And so but what is interesting also is that in terms again of the structure of the text and these intermediary beings, angels or spiritus, how we want to call them, is that they are, for example, first comes the planetary spirit, secondly comes the airy spirit, and thirdly the terrestrial spirits. And so we have a kind of progression right from above to below, from the celestial spheres, so for the visions of God, so outside actually the beyond the prime mover, so in the empyreum. And then we move progressively throughout all the books toward the sublunar world. And this is also interesting to see this aspect spatially, because the planetary spirits are supposed to appear on a molded semisphere made of bricks or earth, and while instead the earthly spirits are supposed to appear in a pit. So we have also this kind of, correspondence tells a lot about the place themselves that like this entity inhabits. But I think also it shows a lot about the creativity in not only in representing and mixing up elements, right, of different traditions and sources in making like the idea of what is an angel and what is the possible apparition one should expect, because that's also another important aspect that of grimoires, that generally grimoires need to provide expectations of what one could experience, and of course having anonymous angels or like angels that are completely detached from the human dimension, it's quite difficult to represent, to arise expectation, while instead a tradition that has the qualities of angels so fruitfully described, even aesthetically, give much more memorable even impressions of what could be the possible expectations of their apparition. So, of course, I think this image of angels and of basically human body shape entities with fiery eyes and beautiful wings, but also kind of threatening creatures are what would be called counterintuitive. So I think that also cognitively we need to understand that certain narratives and certain features about angels are more prone to be transmitted into traditions than other. Yeah, especially in traditions that are not so dogmatic and that draws from different sources and contexts.
Right. And getting back to what you were talking earlier about the different influences on a book like the Sworn Book, and how this book seems to have Jewish and Islamic influences. In the chapter on page 130 and 131, there's a table overview of comparative angelologies, which I thought was very interesting, and how what I mentioned before about the moral status of angels. In Latin Christianity, angels are considered good entities. In Jewish magical tradition, they're considered ambiguous, and an angel may be bad or good. And in the Islamic magical tradition, an angel is neutral. Angels act based on prevailing correspondences. So that would have to do with maybe a location where the angel, if the angel is coming from the north or the angel is coming from the east. Those would be terrestrial angels, by the way, if I'm not mistaken. And then another, how you address them, how you address angels. In Islam, the Islamic or magical tradition, it's directly often invoked by the power or name of God. But if you're addressing a demon, on the other hand, you're also directly addressing. But you can also be indirect by saying, where is the demon? And then name the demon. So whereas in Christianity, it's only by using the name of God. And there are all these like little subtle differences in how you're going about all of your activities when you're doing your conjurations. I thought was very interesting.
Yeah.
With all of this in mind about what you're talking about, all these different types of entities, whether they be angels or demons, I'd like to move actually now to your article about imaginal architectural devices and how ritual space would be constructed as it's discussed in the Sworn Book, because the Sworn Book is kind of like an instructional manual in a way, correct? It tells you exactly what it is you're supposed to do. So your research focuses on spatial aspects of magical practice. So if you could talk about the and this is, I guess, this is also kind of a broad topic. How we can define this, but maybe a good place to begin. If you could explain what you mean by space, what you mean by, because there are all these different words that could be used as a substitute for space, but you're using these words very specifically. Could you talk a little bit more about that?
Yeah, no, exactly. That's also another, complex cultural concept, space as magic is, I would say.
Yeah.
So I would say that it's impossible to define it ultimately because it's what is space, what is location, what is place, because it's been used differently from antiquity up to now, and also theoretically by scholar community, depending on the discipline even, like geography, human geography, architecture, history of religions, they use space and place with different nuances and different understandings, and even across contemporary scholars, for example, about what is sacred space and what is ritual space, etc. We don't have a common agreements, and there are different understanding and frameworks to interpret what is ritual space and sacred space. But of course, when I start developing my PhD project, I was sure that I was looking at specifically about magic circles and about all these ritual arrangements that the practitioner talks so thoroughly about in this handbook. As you said, the Liberators is a book of instructions, and it's very detailed in these aspects, these spatial aspects. And so for me, when I talk about space, I always consider the role of spatial cognition, and so how indeed I was start from the body when I think about space. So how the body move in the space, and what are also the boundaries that practitioners put between their bodies and the entity, so on. So that what I mean by space is this kind of relational dynamics between the body of the magicians and the surroundings in which they perform their practice. So that's for me what I consider a spatial analysis of ritual magic and ritual techniques. So yeah, this is the sense in which I use it, and of course, in the article, I present a bit more about the theories behind ritual space and sacred space in particular. And sacred space, I'm in line with the cognitive science of religion perspective on what is sacrality. So something that is set apart, and so that people can, indeed, humankind has this natural ability in setting things apart and creating sacred things, things that are deemed special by setting things apart. And I think that indeed architecture and architectural operation, that I consider them in a broader sense, is not only making walls or constructing walls, but also like a simple line drawn on the ground, for me, is an architectural operation. Precisely helps to, or like is able to precisely to create sacralities by setting things apart. So an internal space from an external space. So in this sense, also I relate a lot spatial theory with architectural theory. I don't know if I have answered the question actually. But,
yes, I think you have, and you mentioned that the ritual magical circle is a very often used, I guess, space for lack of a better word. What is this circle actually doing, and how does this relate to the human body? As you're talking about this relation of the body to the environment in which it finds itself, what are the circles doing to the body?
Exactly. So exactly as you said, is we find it very often the circle, but we find very different way of using the circles. Also in the Liberiuratus, we have 3 types of circle that are mentioned according to the 3 ranks of spirit, for example, and the circle creates a protective boundaries basically from the operator and the practitioners, but also it could be used as a boundary of containment for the spirit themselves. So the thin line on the ground that the operator traces is supposed to both and the diagrams that the operator traces also along with the circumference. So the circle, we call it circle, but it's never only a circle. Is a geometrical composition on different geometrical elements and a circumference. So this geometrical composition exerts power towards the entity summon. So is also able to attract the entities in certain case, but also it protects, once the body of the magician is inside, is protected from the attack from outside. So in this sense, it creates indeed a very powerful magical boundary that I call imaginal, because it takes for the symbolic and aesthetic implication that entails drawing a line on the circle that I talk about in the article, that reminds a lot about the way in which ancient cities were constructed by ploughing the ground, so it's both. It's this powerful act. I argue is able to make the practitioner to sense the boundaries and to sense differences between internal space and external space, and also is able to sense the presence also of what is not actually there. So an invisible wall or an invisible boundary. The simple act of tracing a line on the ground. So this is what does, I think, the circle to bodily spatial perception as well.
You call your spaces, I guess, Imaginal Architectural Devices, or IADs. And you use term in your article device, that this is a device, but you also go back a little bit in your etymology. There's another word you use, the dispositivo. And how this is defined and used in your concept of imaginal architectural devices. What do you mean by this IAD term? What do you mean by this?
So yes, I used this notion of device. I've taken from Agamben, the philosopher, who theorized the notion of apparatus, dispositivo, apparatus in English, but also can be translated into device and dispositive in French, because it's precisely because of this aspect of magic circles, that they are mobile and temporary. So the fact that the conjurer could reproduce the circles everywhere in their in the surrounding, but also that can be easily erased and deleted, and that it can be, for example, drawn on a carpet and then closed and open when needed, refers to this aspect of mobility, refers precisely to the notion of device. And device also contains the notions of being something that can transform and orient the apprehension of reality of people. And so, in this sense, device is something that can transform the spatial perception of the operator, but it can transform also their ways of interpreting the coordinates on reality and changing them, creating sacrality. But it is also portable and mobile, and that's why I think the device fits neatly in this definition of both mobility and sacrality, and construction of sacrality and deconstruction of sacrality, and so on. And then is architectural, imaginal architecture for what I explained before. So the fact that the construction of an interior and exterior space and the act of engraving the ground with a furrow, or it's in itself an architectural operation, is an architectural act, and it's imaginal because it creates an imaginal boundary. So it's a boundary that it's signified by the simple line on the ground, but has the power, the imaginal power to separate the magician from the entity is conjured.
Thank you for explaining that. That is that's helpful when you're listening to this and not being able to actually see the actual conjuring space with your own eyes, to be able to kind of call it up in your mind's eye, as it were, what we're actually talking about here. So this device, the circle. Let's talk about what happens inside this circle. You mentioned a strategy of miniaturization in your article. I thought this was also very interesting. And maybe it's an important thing to mention right now. When someone is going to do one of these conjurations out of this book, this isn't just a question of, just let me pick up a few little things here or a stick, and I'm going to draw this circle, and I'm just going to jump inside of it, and I'm going to say some things, and then something's going to happen. No, this is a long-term action with planning, construction. There's also bodily fasting, purification. There's certain things that the practitioner has to do, the magician has to do. But not only the constructing of the circle, but all these things that the body has to endure before you can even get to the motion of I'm going to start conjuring this angel. So when you're inside, or when the magician is inside the circle, you're talking about the strategy that the magician uses of miniaturization. What does that mean?
Yeah, so the miniaturization is something that that has been already discussed in another context of magical theory by Jonathan Smith in late antique practices, and miniaturizations refer to the fact that you basically make something small, or like you create a diagram of something else. So you can is a sort of abstraction even that you're doing, and this act of miniaturization can amplify the powers and meaning of the object that is miniaturized. Magic circles are precisely miniaturizations of cosmological topographies. So by studying the diagram of the circle that I was saying before, is not only a circumferences, but are multiple elements combined together. We can clearly see that the models of the magic circle were actually medieval diagrams of the structure of the cosmos. So the celestial spheres, the place of the Earth within the celestial spheres, the directions, the place, the intermediate directions, etc. So in this sense, what the operator is actually doing inside the circle is that by placing themselves in this, that's what I argue at least, that by placing themselves in the in the middle of the circle, at the center of the circle, they're actually relocating themselves within the cosmological order by these miniaturization gymnics, and from therein they are in the place of power and control. So they are indeed at the center, as if they were at the center of the universe, right? And so from therein they can exert control from the to the outside. And compel the spirits to come. So indeed, I was saying before, the circle is both an imaginary boundary, but also is a place of power, and it is a place of power precisely because it is a miniaturization of cosmological topographies and hierarchies. And through the miniaturization, the operator can then act on that topographies and locations that can become an active agent on them by crossing the threshold, entering the circles, and placing themselves at the center.
Do I understand correctly that because this strategy is used, this miniaturization strategy, is that the thinking was, for example, I think that was mentioned in your text or in Caitlin's text, that you have this immense entity, an angel that, it's probably, a planetary angel, for example.
Yeah.
You have this huge, immense body of the planet to begin with. Then you have this entity that you have no idea if what kind of measurements this entity has. If it's, it's probably very, very large, physically large. If we would try to, put it into a physical form, it would probably also be large because a planet is large. So you're trying to make like a little microcosm of the macrocosm so that this entity can fit into your magical circle. And I know that I don't know if that sounds silly the way I'm explaining it, but that's kind of the way I understood it. It's like everything has to fit inside this circle. So you have to make symbols, you have to make diagrams, you have to construct like a little diagram of I'm trying to think of the word. The diagram that you have, the old diagram of the different levels.
Yeah, the hierarchy.
The ranks, yes, the ranks. So you have all these different spheres that have to kind of be condensed down into this little circle. So you have to make like little representations of all of those things in order to condense that expanse, but also that power into this small space. Am I understanding this correctly?
Yeah, I think you're quite right when you say that practitioners want to make the contact with this entity manageable. So they want they give for example in the Uranus indications of their dimensions, how tall they are, and so on. They're usually 2 meters tall or something like that, the planetary spirits. But the point is that, yes, these entities are exactly at a higher rank, so they're much more powerful, and they can be, of course, they can be dangerous for the operator, right? And so the circle indeed functions precisely in this sense, especially the one of the planetary spirit. They are asked to appear and to descend on that circle in a benevolent way. So there's always this sense of making and of hosting the spirit in an appropriate location. And clearly, for example, I argue in the article that the circle for the planetary spirit is clearly a miniaturization of the heavenly sphere, where they are supposed to they believe they dwell. And exactly, it's always a technique of making, I think, the contact manageable for the operator, to create to mimics the spatial conditions of where they dwell, and then by mimicking the spatial conditions where they dwell, they attract also them to that space. They make the condition for them to stay and to have a communications with them.
So would the principle be the same whether you were conjuring an angel or a demon? It's the same idea?
That's
or is it different?
there's always the problem of what is an angel and what is a demon among these texts, right? And as I said, there are very different ways also of using the circles. So a circle can be used simply for protections of the operator, but circles can also use to host the spirit, so as and the operator stays outside. It depends on the source, depends on the entities, and depends on the perceived danger of the entity also as well. But yes, but in general terms, I think that what the circles create is precisely a boundary, then allows a sort of permeability for the communication to happen, and is able to also mediate the communications between the practitioners and the entity in order that they have a safe relationship.
Okay.
And this is something that we also see in late antique magical practices, where they don't use circles as they do in medieval ritual magic, but also there it's very important the phylactery, so something that is wear on the body for the protection of the magician's body, because in the presence of the deity that appears, the practitioner is in danger, because the energy and the power that the entity is able to generate can be harmful for the practitioner. So it's always important that the contact in rituals of apparition can be mediated, and I think that magic circles and other special techniques are able precisely to mediate the contact with the angels and with the entities and spirits and so on.
So, and the circles themselves are not just any old circle. There are very specific dimensions for the type of circle that you have to construct for the type of entity that you're wanting to conjure, correct?
Yes,
right.
Exactly. There are different circles for each entities and for each operations. The varieties of circles is almost endless, because it's constantly reinvented, right? Although we can identify in certain patterns, but the circles are constantly transformed. The shape, even across the same ritual tradition or certain manuscript traditions, we can see differences in how circles were conceived and constructed. Also, in the Liber Iuratus itself, the circle in the Summa Sacra Magicae is different from the one that we find in the London tradition, and this depends precisely on this great variability, hybridization, innovation, transformation that is typical of the grimoire tradition, because belong to all the redactors and the copies and the authors that work on the manuscript and change the manuscript according to their own interpretations and also according to what they consider more effective.
Understood. So this is not as some simple little endeavor that a magician is going to do if they're trying to conjure up a spirit, whether it be an angel or a demon. This is very meticulous, time-consuming. How long did the practitioner have to wait before the first construction period, and then there had to be like a waiting period? How long was that for?
Yes, so for the Liber Iuratus Honorius, 72 days, I guess.
Because it had to be a new moon or something before you could do the next step or something?
I think it goes according to liturgical time.
Okay.
And it was also mentioned, phase of the moon phases, but yes, it follows also a purification period, a very long purification period. Yeah. So the practitioner is supposed to purify themselves, both the body, but also morally they should be purified before they can actually erect the first circumferences. And usually the construction of the circles take place during one night, the first night, at least in the Liber Iuratus, and then in the second night it starts the proper invocation and arising of the spirits and so on, and the conjuration lasts 3 days in total.
Right. So you have a period of time where you could have almost 4 months, correct?
Yeah, exactly. It's something like that.
Something like that. Between 3 and 4 months for you to be able to do this.
Yes, also because then you need to have permission granted by God, right, to go forward in the operation. So it can, and maybe you need to repeat in order to get the permission. So it can last.
It can be very,
But there are even longer ritual of like 18 months, for example, for the Abramelin ritual. So it's
right.
Yes, they can be very time consuming. Yeah.
Well, this is all just absolutely fascinating to me. I am so happy that I'm talking with you about this and have been able to have the opportunity to read all of this material. This really has been a pleasure for me, a real joy, because I always thought I don't know why, but I always thought, don't even try, because it's just too over your head. You can't understand this stuff. So I'm glad that I finally did jump in with both feet and try to understand this, and I'm really enjoying it. So I can actually understand a lot more than I think I can. I'm not that stupid after all. Okay. Anyway, in conclusion, I would like to ask you if you could talk about your thoughts regarding why previous scholars haven't been doing the type of research that you're doing now, or if they have, if it hasn't been, as in depth as what you're doing right now, and why you feel that this is a lacuna or a gap in the understanding about the practices of ritual magic.
Yeah, that's a very good question, and well, I think that there are two reasons who are connecting to each other. So first of all, we didn't have so much knowledge about handbooks of ritual magic. So grimoires were like stored in the archives, and very few people like went in the archive and look at them and tried to make a sense of what was written inside. But precisely also about the complexity, about the history behind these handbooks. We don't, most of the time they are anonymous authorship, we don't know who owned them. So it's we needed to do a kind of basic philological work at the beginning. And so people focused mostly on text. They focus on textual reception, textual transmissions, and also editing handbooks like this. Because now we have, even though there are so many handbooks that have not even been edited, not even been looked upon, we have a consistent amount of sources that has been now edited. And so I think that up until now, scholars have done this like basic work on editing, and this is also fundamental. So not basic, fundamental work on editing the corpuses and the handbooks. But also, and is in connection to this, then the attention was put mostly on text, and so for example of literary topos. And possible, for example, also, collections of where the texts were circulating, and if we can, for example, make a distinction between Solomonic magic and Hermetic magic. So what were like the try to find like what could have been a Solomonic corpuses and so on. And these, of course, and other aspect of the handbooks were, of course, neglected. For example, the diagrams of the manuscript, all the visual materials that the manuscript has, and the material aspect even of the manuscript, the codicological aspect of the manuscript, were neglected because of this reason, because of the fact that we needed to do this like fundamental work on the text himself and getting the text published and edited. And this is, I think, this of course creates a lacuna, because when we want to address practice and techniques and what was actually meant, ritual practice in these handbooks, we need to start looking precisely at these elements in the handbooks, that are the diagrams, the way they conceived the ritual space, the ritual actions, the materials, the materiality, but also the materiality itself of the handbook. So, for example, how the people draw their diagrams and so on. And this is precisely what I'm doing. So I'm looking at this aspect of the sources. And yes, I don't know if I've answered, but yeah.
I think that's a great answer.
Okay. Yeah, good.
It's very clear, and I think that's also what you're doing seems to. I mean, when I was reading your article, it seemed to bring it to life almost, because if you're just focusing on the words of the text, you're still left with all these questions as the reader, like, well, how are you supposed to do this, and what are you supposed to use, and do I have to wear special clothes, or does the space have to be a particular size, or can I do it in my house? Do I have to do it outside? All of these different questions that would pop into your head if you're like thinking about actually going about doing something like this. All these, even though the books were instruction manuals, if you don't have a drawing that you can look at, like a model of which you can use to, because these circles, as you said, are super intricate about all these lines and different geometric patterns that are inside the circle, and then you have to write the name of the angel in a certain spot, and then you have to do this and you have to do that. All these different things, if you don't have like a visual guide helping you. I think that it kind of deadens the material in a way. And what you're doing now is fleshing it out. You're making it come alive, and that I think is really exciting, especially for someone like me who feels kind of a sense of hesitancy about approaching these texts to begin with, thinking that I'll never understand what these people are even trying to get at. So I think you're doing important work in that sense of really explaining, this is what's going on in this circle, or this is what's going on in this space with this device. So I'm really happy to be able to talk to you about that. The article's name again is Imaginal Architectural Devices in the Ritual Space of Medieval Necromancy, and it's found in Endeavor. It's open source. I will provide the link. I would really recommend that everyone read the entire article, and also the chapter by, I can't remember her last name. Her first name is Caitlin Mesler. Thank you. That also really explains a lot about the Sworn book, how that was constructed, what was going on in that book. That gives you a good basis, I think, to understand Andrea's article. Andrea, are you writing something at the moment?
Yes, something.
Wink, wink.
Yes, something's gonna come up soon. It will be still about space and and construction of ritual spaces and ritual magic, but it will be about something a bit later than the Liber Iuratus Honori. So towards the period of Agrippa and the others. So
this is where I'm referring to your thesis now, your dissertation, correct?
No, I'm not referring to this. No. My thesis is about the same the Liber Iuratus, but also other sources, influential sources from the 13th to the 15th century, I'm working, yes, on the ritual spaces and the study of ritual spaces in this across the constellations of various sources from the 13th to the 15th century. But
And
now,
alongside of that, you're also
alongside
writing.
of that, I'm writing an article on a topic that actually I wrote about in my master's thesis, and now I'm like readdressing the topic as well. Is on the Abramelin, and that was I was mentioning it before. It's a ritual for summoning the guardian angel, and yes, it will be along the same line of my research on ritual space, but in a different context.
And I'm embarrassed to ask you this, but did you upload your master's thesis anywhere where people can read?
Yes,
is it on academia?
It's on I think on the University of Amsterdam archive. And it's what was called uvascriptis.com.
Something
like
that.
Scriptis, exactly.
Okay, yeah. I'm going to make a note of that.
It's available there. Exactly, uvascriptis.
Okay. And that was your research master thesis. Because I have not read that. I am embarrassed to say.
No worries.
But now that I know where I can find it, I'm going to read it.
Yeah, exactly.
I was always very interested in your line of research. Of course, when we were studying together, we were all doing our own thing, and I was off in otherkin land, and you were in ritual magical space land.
It was so nice, precisely because it was so diverse, right? We have very different interests and approaches, but anyway, we had the common grounds.
Exactly. Exactly. I was always very intrigued by your research, though. But like I said, I kind of put a little limitation on myself, thinking I'm not going to understand what he's talking about. But it's very, very accessible and approachable. It's not anything that I just built it up in my head that it was just much more complicated than what it actually is. Not to say that you don't have to put a little of effort into it, but because it is a complex subject.
It is really a complex subject.
In that regard.
But also otherkin, I think, is a very complex subject as well.
Yeah,
for those who are
in a different way.
Not familiar with.
In a different way. Yeah, and that's what it's about. It's your familiarity with things, and if you're outside of that, because I'm not fluent in Greek, I'm not fluent in Latin. I didn't study those in school, so I think those types of issues were kind of holding me back, thinking that I wouldn't be able to approach this material. But luckily, that was just something that I imposed upon myself that I didn't need to. I am really enjoying your stuff. And will the article that you're working on now, will this be also an published open access that we can see in the future?
I think it will be part of a volume, but I'm not sure if, I guess, yes, it will be open access, but I'm honestly not sure yet.
Not sure yet.
But I will keep you posted.
Okay, great. All right. Lastly, I'd like to ask if you want to share where people can find you online in your work.
Yes, of course. Well, I'm on academia, and then I'm also on Facebook and Instagram, although I don't use so much Facebook and Instagram, so people can reach me easily on academia, I think.
Okay.
Yeah.
Do you have a profile at Stockholm?
Yeah,
University?
And I have, of course, a profile, a web page at Stockholm University.
Okay.
If you type Andrea Franchetto Stockholm University, you find immediately my page. Yeah.
I will be sure to include all of those links to those places in the program notes.
Yeah.
Well, again, thank you so much for talking with me today, and I always enjoy spending time with you. So thank you.
Me too, the same. And I hope to see you sometimes very soon.
Yes.
It will be possible somewhere. I don't know.
I hope so too. Until then, I wish you the best of luck with all of the things that you're doing.
Thank you. The same for you, Stephanie. Thanks a lot for the opportunity.
Thank you. My thanks again to Andrea for this super interesting conversation into grimoire traditions and the larger category of magic in general. Please check out Andrea's research master thesis about the Abra Melin ritual, plus all the other links for more information about Andrea's work. I hope you'll take a moment to also have a look at the other articles I've linked in the program notes, as these really give a more complete picture of the whole topic of magic and grimoires. In particular, the article on magic by Otto and Stausberg, the chapter about the Sworn Book of Honorius by Caitlin Mesler, and the article by Nicolas Weil-Parot about addressative magic. In other news, I have a live show coming up soon on my YouTube channel about tarot with author, speaker, and artist Elliot Edge, who will be discussing and demonstrating, by means of a live reading on yours truly, their own process of card reading called analytic tarot. This will be taking place on the 31st of August, 3 p.m. Eastern Daylight Time, or 9 p.m. Central European Summer Time. Elliot will also be taking questions from the chat, so I hope you will consider joining us for that, and I'm really looking forward to it. That's it for now. Take care, everybody, and as always, thanks for listening.